students of Reddit, what's your well that happened moment in the classroom? Two things you need to know. Point first, there was this guy at my school, whom I've now known for 25 years. His thing is to scream fuck yeah at everything. Has done it since I've known him. Anytime someone mentions Matt, someone always adds a fuck yeah. He is huge and very loud. When he comes in the bar he announces his presence with an exuberant fuck yeah. If he calls you, you say hello, and he yells fuck yeah. You get the picture. Point second, my senior year it was a thing to sneak vodka into school in Cinnabon mugs. For some inexplicable reason plastic Cinnabon mugs were like a huge thing. Sashaying around flaunting your Cinnabon mug rolls eyes. Anyway, I'm in a post-lunch class one day, and one of the Cinnabon vodka girls up and starts puking bright, hot pink, fruity vomit out the window behind her. Then she stood up and screamed WHOOO fuck yeah at the top of her lungs with her face covered in puke. Fuck yeah, dude is also in this class, so he immediately screams fuck yeah back. Then she yells fuck yeah again, and they go back and forth yelling fuck yeah, getting progressively louder with each one, until the teacher gets to her and ushers her out of the room. Point the rest of us just sat there like what the fuck was that all about? Edit, golden platinum. Fuck yeah. This happened like 2 to 3 semesters ago at my college. I was in finance class, about 10 minutes from it ending. It was around 2:30, and I had to work at 4:30. Planned on hitting the gym between. Typical day, was getting ready to go by drinking my pre-workout in the last 10 minutes of class. Well, turns out someone had a different plan. We get an email that the school is in a legitimate lockdown. There's a questionable man on campus with a tactical vest and large backpack walking around campus. Oh boy. So here's the reactions to this information. 50% of the class immediately panics. No idea what to do. Huddles in the corner texting their loved ones. One chick bawling her eyes out, making all of the noise, puked in the corner. Sick. Foreign exchange student whips out his laptop and starts a League of Legends game, getting visibly agitated at it in the back of the room, faking Yasuo. Am I right? Teacher breaks a piece of metal off the vent and stands by the door, prepared to what looks like kill Julius Caesar. Professor in the adjacent room, connecting door, walks in and explains that we should all calm down, because worst case scenario is we die, and we get a cool plaque with our name on it in the hallway. This does not help the students already having anxiety. May I note I'm over here, phone dying, absolutely yeeted to sheet on pre-workout with the inability to expend this energy. Wondering if I'll get fired for a no-call no-show, and feeling 99% pissed, rather than scared. Look to the left out the window, swat him on the roof. Gad, this sketchy man came into our room. I'm of the utmost confidence that he walked away without harming a single human, simply because it was apparent that God left this classroom long ago, and we were in more hysteria alive than dead. Anyways, 2.5 hours later, I'm able to call my boss, after we were allowed to leave, and tell him that the kid who got reported is simply a student going to class and had a big backpack. There was no vest. The student who reported him had already gotten in trouble for trying to start a racial conflict a week prior and just had an agenda to push. The amount of pissed I was immeasurable. Freshman year of college, I had one professor who would randomly call on students in class, and if they didn't answer correctly, he would proceed to give them a roast in front of the whole class for their lack of knowledge on the subject material. I was in the class with a few of my good friends, as it was a prerequisite that we all needed to have. Even though we got our fair share of roasting from him as well, we all thought it was funny and knew it was his way of making sure the students are engaged in the lecture. About halfway through the semester, he called on one person, and after she incorrectly answered, he started to casually roast this student. At this point, another girl raised her hand to get the prof's attention. After he called on her, she proceeded to vocally berate him about how he was treating us all like children, as well as call him every vulgar word she could think of. At this point, he's shouting back at her too, complete with all the same vulgarities that she used on him. And me and my friends are just sitting in the back, laughing under our breath, while simultaneously being completely dumbfounded that this kind of stuff actually happens in college. Finally, he yells at her to leave lecture. She obliges, and as soon as she is out of the room, he proceeds to roast her even more to the class. It was so odd to see something like this, especially since I had just come from high school a few months before. Man, college is wild. Back in 8th grade middle school we had this really cool and chill U.S. history teacher. He never raised his voice, and he was pretty laid back about class and work. He taught in a storytelling kind of manner, and I don't ever remembering annotating any document in his class. Well, we had that one kid. In this story I'm gonna call him Jim. Jim was always late to class, and never turned stuff in. He was that one really cringy kid that everyone either hated or pitied. My teacher never got really fed up with him, but would always show his distaste for him in his facial expressions. My teacher normally would pull him aside to talk to him about his tardiness or missing assignments. Jim would say he would be earlier/do the assignments, but he of course never did. One day, Jim walks in late again. My teacher is about to start teaching, and when he turns and sees Jim walking in, well, this time, my teacher wasn't so happy about it. It was the middle of the school year towards the end, and my teacher must have gotten so fed up with Jim at that point. My teacher yells Jim's name at the top of his lungs. He normally had a boomy voice, but when he yelled it amplified 100 times over. The ground literally shook when he yelled, and I'm sure they could hear him from downstairs at the other end of the school. Our school wasn't that small either. For the rest of the class period, about 30 minutes, literally it was dead silent. Everyone was still kind of shocked from it. In high school this big, in size, metalhead was always late for the first class period of the day because he was hanging out in the hallway with his girlfriend for too long and never gave himself enough time to walk to the classroom. The teacher was a real laid-back kinda guy and had a flowing sort of teaching style. He really didn't mind, but one day he got annoyed because he knew the reason. He told the dude that he could say goodbye to his girlfriend a few minuets earlier and get to class on time. There was a little back and forth as this metalhead attempted to lie his way onto some type of excuse. The teacher wasn't having it and said that he had to get to class on time once. He said, "You have to do it once. If you don't get to this class on time tomorrow, then you're going to have to stay after school for detention." There was back and forth as this metalhead attempted to determine the seriousness of this threat. It seemed pretty serious. The teacher said he'd make the kid help clean the classroom. The next morning we are all in there, the bell rings, and the teacher opens his mouth to speak. Suddenly from the hallway is the thunderous sound of someone wearing heavy boots running down it towards the room. Accompanying this is a deep-throated scream. No apostrophe. The teacher looks at the class in shock as the door flies open and there is one last thunderous clap from a boot being stomped as the metalhead enters the room. Out of breath, this kid casually walks to his seat and says in his deep raspy voice, "I don't know what they're screaming about out there." Apostrophe. I doubt that anyone else in the school could have yelled like that. No longer a student, but when I was a freshman in high school there was this guy I knew since middle school who would always get into trouble. Well, one day he told our math teacher that he needed to go to the restroom. Already familiar with his behavior and using the restroom excuse to ditch class, she refused to let him go. He insisted that he had to go, but she refused yet again. Minutes passed and told the teacher that if she didn't let him use the restroom, that he was going to piss on the trash can. Trying to call his bluff, she told him go for it on the trash can. Some of the students didn't think he'd do it and egged him on to do it. He got up from his desk and approached the trash can, which was at the corner right next to the classroom door. He was in the corner for a minute. Then he actually peed in the trash can. The teacher just sat there as it happened, nonchalant like. I can't remember if he left the class after he pulled it off, since it was years ago. But yeah, it cracks me up thinking about that moment. A bonus I should add about the guy. My best friend knew him as well, and were even good friends. He once told me that during our sophomore year the guy got expelled for breaking the door window of the security office. They chased him and caught up to him at a nearby mall. Not in the classroom, but it's still something that happened at school. At the last day of school, the entire high school goes into the theater for assembly. Then the entire grade presents the students that are leaving, and for every person that is leaving, a friend of theirs will walk up with a microphone and state why they will miss them, their achievements, etc. In our school year, this kid, let's call him John, was a complete asshole. He treated everyone badly and smoked in school, etc. Rumors have it that he was asked to leave at the end of the year and that he was pretty much expelled. But he was still presented by his friend in front of the whole high school. When his friend finished talking, he grabbed the microphone, pointed to our principal, and shouted in it, "I'm glad that I'm leaving this school, as I'll never ever have to see your faking face again." Then he gave the mic to his friend and left via backstage. Everyone was at this assembly, from grade 9 to grade 12. Every teacher, counselor, even the principal and the director of the school was there. There was a huge gasp and everyone was completely silent for the next 30 seconds. Then the next people which are leaving walked up to the stage. So, yeah, that happened. I was standing outside the classroom before class. Tim was a popular pothead who played a guitar. Gary was an upperclassman who'd been in some troubles before. Tim had hurt himself somehow and so he was on crutches. We are standing there. Gary comes walking by with a group of dudes and just yanks one of the crutches away from Tim. "Oh, thanks," Tim says. Gary and the dudes walk off and the bell rang, so I walked in and Tim hobbled on one crutch. The teacher saw, but I guess she thought Gary was supposed to take the crutch for some reason. Class was ending and Tim complained because he couldn't get to his next class unless he got his crutch back. The teacher apologized for her misunderstanding the situation and phoned the vice principal so that he could try to locate Gary and this crutch. This was not a hard job for the vice principal because Gary had gotten in trouble with him earlier in the day, so he'd stolen the crutch from Tim and promptly burst into the vice principal's office and threatened him with it. Story from the dude standing outside the office was that Gary was swinging crutch around. He knocked over a trash can and was pounding on the desk with the crutch. The vice principal stood across the desk from him with his arms in the air. He kept saying, "Think about what you're doing, Gary. You don't want to be doing this now." I guess that by the time the teacher called, Gary had been de-escalated and disarmed, and it was all over, except for figuring out where the crutch had come from. It would have been great if she could have warned him ahead of time. Not my story, but my English teacher in high school told it. A little backstory. I went to an ALC center at this time, which is basically a high school for kids with mental problems and bad home life that makes regular high school impossible / extremely difficult. Ours happened to be situated in an old strip mall right next to the pizza and pasta. Anyways, it was about 11 AM and she was teaching her class when this man just walked in through the front door and into her classroom, since it was closest to the front door. He looked around what was very obviously a classroom, a desk, a projector, bookcases, posters about grammar and learning, the whole shebang, and looked at the teacher and started asking her if she wanted to buy his steaks. She asked him to please leave as this was a classroom. He insisted that his steaks were high quality and that they were a good price. She asked him again to leave since she was trying to teach. The man turns to the nearest student and starts asking him about buying his steaks. Student just stares at him, not knowing how to respond. My teacher calls in the principal. Principal shows up, man pushes past him and runs out the door and down the street. Teacher just shrugged and went back to teaching. She was a really good teacher and made the kids enjoy being in the class, so no one really wanted to continue talking about it until after class so that they could continue the lesson. A few years after that, and a few more incidents of people just walking in, we got a new door with security measures on it. It's still a joke around the school as far as I know to randomly say I got some high quality meat in a weird accent. This is the story of the dog. My high school English teacher in my junior year was known for being fun and eccentric. She told wild stories and had odd habits. The oddest habit was bringing a large plaster Dalmatian dog to class on test days. We all pet it for good luck. It had been a tradition in her class for over 20 years. This thing was ugly, terribly plastered, fading paint, weird proportions. The fact that it was the size of a real Dalmatian made it weirder. But it was important to her. So important that she chained it to desks to keep it from being stolen. Because every year, someone would steal it. When I was in her class, Dot was stolen and held for ransom. Videos with a blindfolded Dot were sent to my teacher, detailing how Dot would be released if the test was cancelled. This didn't work. Dot was not returned, and test day was looming. Students became upset that Dot was not there to comfort them. The dog napper was found, and he returned. For a time. Later in the year, our playful feud with the physics department was made known. The test day comes, and there are physics symbols all over this poor plastered dog. So, since I had art supplies at home, I offered to repaint Dot. I was trustworthy and had no schemes in mind, so my teacher agreed to let me point. She unchained the dog and hell broke loose. The previous dog thief quickly got up and snatched Dot. Turns out it was light enough to bolt out of the class and to the parking lot with. His accomplice ran with him. I ran after. It didn't help that I was wearing heels that day, but by some divine intervention, I didn't trip and was able to catch up halfway before they got to the parking lot. But before I could take back the plaster pup, the first guy passed it to his cohort, who then ran off. I tried to catch up to this next guy, but to no avail. I was blocked by the first. The second guy was in the clear. He would have gotten away with it. If he didn't drop and break it. Dot was in pieces. We all had a no sheet look on our faces. The teacher and rest of the class, hearing our distress, come out and see the carnage. The dust from the plaster blows away in the wind. The dog, a 20-odd year legacy, was gone forever. Our teacher wasn't too mad. She replaced Dot with a golden plastic hippo. Wasn't the same though. She commended me for my effort. The school newspaper did a piece on the incident, but I was never mentioned. Still salty about that tbh. And that's the story of Dot. Not many know it anymore, and there are so many comments here that I don't know if anyone will see this, but I can't live my life not telling this story. Goodbye Dot. Rip literally in pieces. This requires a little backstory. I lived in a tiny little town made up almost entirely of farmers. Most of the kids from my town didn't finish school, they just worked on their parents' farms. Most of them got a JED, or were homeschooled to comply with laws. Because our town was so small, population of less than 500 people, we had two choices for schooling. The private school about 20 minutes north, or the public school about 40 minutes west. The private school was safe, with good teachers, and students that were under control. But it was expensive. The public school was the school that all the kids that were kicked out of their schools went. Most of these kids were violent, drug addicts, or just never showed up to class. Having nothing to compare it to at the time, I didn't realize how faked up it was until I moved away and made friends outside of school. We had an average of 3 to 5 bomb threats a year. We had several lockdowns because kids were bringing in knives or other weapons. Our school would bring in the local PD a few times a year to do dog searches for drugs. We had metal detectors in front of the school, and you absolutely were not, under any circumstances, allowed to bring a book bag into the school. Anyway, suffice to say there were a lot of fights and a lot of violence. Two incidents stand out though amongst it all. We had a guy a grade below me that was absolutely obsessed with things being fair. He would lose his sheet if he thought someone was cheating. I was taking Spanish class with him, and he caught the guy sitting one seat in front of him cheating during a test. He freaked out. He started screaming and calling him every name in the book. The teacher escorted him to the office, and we all thought it was over except it wasn't. 2 classes later, and he caught the cheater in the hallway. This kid was so pissed that he attacked him with the only weapon he had, a pencil. He shoved the pencil up the kid's nose, and it came out his eye socket. He wound up getting arrested. Other kid lost an eye too. Our town, and unfortunately the town we were bused to, were both extremely racist. We had a single kid in class that wasn't white, but after years of bullying, his parents took him out of the school. Anyway, it had been years since we had anyone in the school who wasn't white. In sophomore year, it come out that one of the girls in my grade was dating a Mexican guy. The boys in our class, and in some of the classes both above and below us, lost their sheet. Suddenly signs were appearing on her locker every morning. Horrible, terrible, derogatory things were plastered all over her locker. Then the bullying started. Some of the guys would trip her while she was walking. The girls took her clothes during gym class. She would get threatening letters in her locker. Eventually it ended when she involved the police. I always felt so bad for her. I go to an art school where my department is directly above the sculpture department. Plus, the building is structured so that the center of that floor is open, so we can see and hear everything that happens below us in the hallways. Needless to say, we hear a lot of performance art sometimes in class. My favorite was when we were just critiquing in one of my late classes where everyone, even the professor, is exhausted. We often kept the door open because it automatically locks and people needed to get in and out, to go to the bathroom etc. Suddenly we hear metal items fall from somewhere, and the blood-curdling shrieks of 1,000 banshees from outside our classroom. Things keep falling, and soon enough maybe 2 other girls screech along. It sounded like people were being brutally beaten with pots and pans, but they just wouldn't die. We were ready to faking yeet out of there to avoid being murdered. My professor hurried out to look out from the balcony/hallway and just sees a group of people watching these 3 girls making screaming like they were being exorcised of Satan himself. I saw her turn and look at us with the most "I'm faking done" faces she's ever made, and walk back inside and shake her head. We just closed the door and tried to tune it out. Oh my gosh, I have a tale to tell. Sorry it's so long. So I was junior drum major in marching band, but I wasn't enjoying the job, and in fact, it gave me great anxiety having mistakes pointed out by staff in front of 60+ people. I would go to my band teacher for help on things like directions or what to do in certain situations, and things will get better for about 2 days before they reverted to how they were before. I wasn't liking it. Fast forward to a few months ago. I was in a leadership meeting after the marching season had ended. Our band teacher had asked where our piccolo player was because he really wanted her to be a section leader and therefore show up at the leadership meetings. One friend explained that she said that she would rather quit band than be a section leader. This was shocking to all of us because we were trying so hard to grow the band, not shrink it. We understood where the piccolo player was coming from though, because section leader is a difficult job and she was a year 1 band player. But then, my band teacher explains that well, I'll get her next time. As if he does not care about her own choices. I say that, if she doesn't want to be a section leader, then let her be. I didn't say it in a rude tone, and in fact I'm surprised he even heard it. He looked at me dead in the eyes and says, "You can leave now." I was shocked at first, because I didn't know if he was joking, so I asked, "What, really?" And he goes, "Yeah, you can leave now." I then promptly proceeded to cry for 5 hours. My parents came home soon after that to find me crying. I explained to them how I was feeling about band, and they were so supportive and understanding. My dad gave me the advice to ask him if he truly wanted me as drum major next year, because it did not feel like it. I go in the next morning to apologize to him, and he explains that it's all in the past, and it's all okay. I then pop the question, asking me if he wanted me as drum major for next year. He then goes, "Well, you'll have to wait until auditions." Really? I'm your junior drum major, and literally anyone else would have given some form of encouragement, like, "I know you're the junior drum major, but I really hope you do try out for auditions." But no, there was no form of encouragement for me to come back. So, I take another month to decide what I wanted to choose. It boils down to 3 options. 1. I stay in band as a drum major. 2. I stay in the band just as a regular clarinet player. Or 3. I leave the band. My issue was that I would need time next year because I wanted to take more advanced classes, and band is like a part-time job. It would be so hard to do both. So after trying to leave all emotion out of my decision, I eventually decided that it was best for me to leave and to use the time to apply to college and focus on my classes. I go tell my teacher in person my decision. This conversation lasts about 1 minute, and not once does he look in my direction. Seriously, he looked at his computer the entire time. I explained that, even though it was a difficult decision that took me a very long time to make, I would need to quit band for next year. I tell him all the logistical reasons on why I'm quitting, about how I need the time for my classes, etc. I don't tell him that I'm also quitting because of how the staff runs the band, but that's a whole other topic. As I get up to leave, he just mumbles, "Okay, fine, your choice." Yeah, it is my choice. The day after, my dad gets a call from him explaining the school oboe is back, so I can play it, because he said repairs would only take a month, but it took way longer, and we could no longer keep paying to rent one, and how I was such a great leader and oh we'll miss her, and how I'm my own worst critic. He had 2 chances to say that to my face, but no, he tells my dad via phone call. That day, during my last class, which was band, a band staff teacher pulls me out of class during school, and I already know what this is about. We walk outside, and he asks if I've been stressed. I explained that due to distant family issues, my Danish family member had cancer, and he's amazing, and doesn't deserve that, and classes, things have been stressful, but I was okay. He then asks why I was leaving, and again, I list all of the logistical stuff, like I won't have time, I'm applying to colleges, I don't have the passion for it, etc. His response was claiming I was too lazy and just wanted to have an easy senior year. Back off, I'm taking 4 app classes, and that I signed a 2-year commitment to be with the band. Okay, show me that. I never signed anything. Also, why would I have to do auditions if that was the case? But I'll give his final words. Wow, I can't believe that after all I've invested in you, you're just quitting the band. Have a good senior year. And he storms off. Then I promptly proceeded to cry another 5 hours. I literally had to hide in the instrument room because school wasn't done, and I didn't want to cause drama. Point after that, my parents were ready to throw hands, but I didn't want that for now because I didn't want to start any more drama. Fast forward 2 weeks to me getting home from a field trip. School ends at 2:10 and we get back 1:50, 10 minutes before we were scheduled to be back. The teachers told us not to bring anything, so my friends and I had nothing to do. We didn't want to waste time, so we asked our art teacher, fully understanding she'd most likely say no, because we didn't have permission from our last class teachers to stay in her art class to work. She said yes, but that night at 6:50 I get an email from my band teacher saying he wanted to talk to me. I reply sure, ask what time and what it's about. He doesn't answer except for the time. Thanks. I go in the next morning, and oh boy, I brought Macup, just expecting I'd be emotional after, because I thought it was about my decision. My band teacher starts by asking if there's anything going on at home. First off, no, my parents are not abusive. And secondly, if I wanted to tell you that, I would. That's very personal information. Then he goes on to explain that he is unsatisfied with how I've been behaving, and my character is changing for the worst, and that I'm contributing to making the band worse. He then gave me a detention for skipping class, reason being that I told my art teacher that I had my band teacher's permission to skip his class. I tried to say that wasn't what happened and explained what really happened, and apologized if there was a misunderstanding. He wouldn't listen. I contacted my parents, and when I got home, they asked what had happened. Not only did I get a detention, my band teacher sent them an email about how I was lying, being uncharacteristic, and how I was out to get the band. I told him my decision in person, well in advance, because I cared about the band and wanted to make sure that if I left, they would be okay. My parents then intervened. Luckily they and the principal, who was so kind through all of this, pulled me out of the class, got me into another one, requested my band teacher write an apology letter, and made it so no band staff could talk to me without administration. Point that put me through a bad loop, but I'm doing much better now. Thanks if you stuck around and read the whole thing. The day of the nose. Nothing, absolutely nothing even comes close to it, not just in my high school career, in my almost 32 years of life. My old high school friends still talk about it, both to relive good times and to simply remember I was there. And even now, 15 years later, I have friends who work at my old high school telling me about students they're still telling each other about it. Embellished and exaggerated beyond all reason, of course. What's the fun about a good story if you can't add some of your own stuff to it? But I was there. And I will tell you what really happened. I'm in junior year physics at an all-boys Catholic high school, taught by a well over 70-year-old professor in his first year at a high school. Now, for those of you who've never been to an all-boys school, imagine all the dudes at your work hanging out together at break, all day, forever. You know all the stupid shit those guys get up to, making each other laugh. and all the shenanigans they do, or plan, together? Well, imagine they are teenagers with all that bored energy and social angst, and it's all spurring on the hilarity these chummy monkeys enjoy but without the women around. There's surprisingly not much to compete about anymore during the day. Read, bullying and fighting, meaning that all the effort these men would otherwise spend jockeying for position is instead invested even more on all the antics done solely for their own entertainment. We are talking stuff like kicking Teen A out into the hallway for acting up in class, only for him to come back into class unannounced when his friend Teen B gets kicked out later on. It's tag team, sir. Haven't you seen wrestling? Repeat for as long as it keeps getting laughs until end of period, taking a guy's backpack and throwing it into the seniors only quad, then watching how long it takes for either the guy to try brave all the watching seniors or for one of the teachers to go fetch it for the poor sod, all while the entire student body watches and cheers/boos. Said seniors bringing 50 plus super soakers to school and shooting everyone outside the quad while standing in it, throwing mattresses into the swimming pool to cancel swim/water polo practices. This happened at least once a year. We never figured out where they kept getting the mattresses from, taking running leaps off desks and slamming full speed into the classroom walls because A, your teacher is 400 plus pounds and can't stop you, and B, there's a class on the other side where some of your friends are and you want them to tell you how much the wall moved when you did it. This happened multiple times daily every period, setting up tripwires in the photo lab so that the next person to walk in is doused in developing solution. Except the next person to walk in was the photo teacher, who trips fully into the developing bath. Class was cancelled that day. Each of these would make 4 good stories on their own, but none of them holds a candle to the nose point. It's 10 AM, that wonderful period just late enough in the day where those guys that sleep through first period are starting to wake up, but everyone else can't wait until third period is over so we can get to lunch. In other words, everyone is paying some degree of attention when class starts. The bell rings, but there's no Mr. Professor. That's fine. He's often late. He's old, remember? It sometimes takes him an extra bit to make it to the classroom while we are waiting. However, we can see a figure rummaging around in the hallway. Our class faced the doors, one flanking either side of the chalkboard. It seems like the figure is about to come in when the professor finally arrives. As the door closes, we can catch a glimpse of the figure in the hallway and what appears to be latex, but the door closed too fast and the figure was just enough out of sight where we were unsure class starts. Not 5 minutes later, the figure appears at the classroom doors again and bursts through. It's a guy wearing a latex mask of a big nose. You know, one of those Halloween masks that fully covers your head so that it looks like their body ends up in simply a giant nose where the head should be. Look, sir. The class clown yells from the front row. It's the nose, eh? The professor says. He's barely looked up from his projector. It was the early zeros and is more looking at the class clown who spoke up than he is the masked newcomer. It's the nose, everyone's starting to say it now, as much to make a scene as they are anything else. Soon the whole room is chanting nose at the top of their lungs. Desks are rocking, students are yelling, and some are actually dancing in the back for no reason at all. The guy with the nose mask turns, waves to the professor, then turns back to look at the class clown and pulls out water balloons from his pockets. Sir, he's got a water balloon, hits the class clown square in the face. It explodes, water everywhere. Oh, shit, sir, says the class clown as his own water balloons appear in his hands from nowhere. Mind you, the class has just gone apeshit the moment the nose pulled out his balloons. A rising cry of "Hoo ahh" had gripped the class, seemingly a rising tide of energy as the half expected / half hoped something would happen. And when the nose pegged the class clown, it's like a bomb went off. Everyone's yelling, those guys dancing in the back drop to the ground screaming oh my god, and everyone else is making as much of an individual ruckus as they can point. But when the class clown returned fire with his own water balloons, it was like the madhouse unlocked all their cells and the prisoners rioted. Tables are upending. People are running around screaming now, not just screaming in place, and those guys dancing in the back have stopped ducking for cover and started dancing on the far tables in the back. Meanwhile, back up front, the nose is visibly stunned. Apparently he wasn't expecting his co-conspirator's battle station to be fully operational and he's not sure what to do. But he does know that he doesn't want to be caught by the professor, who hadn't heard the cries of the nose, but sure as hell saw two boys throwing water balloons at each other in the middle of class. With his great war cry of "A!" the professor gets up from his wizened chair and begins shuffling vigorously at the nose, who turns and runs right around the teacher's table. You see, at the front of our physics class there was a sturdy oak table teachers could use to sit at, hold papers on, or otherwise host experiments upon front and center. The professor rarely used it, preferring to sit in a seemingly shrine to grading papers in the far left corner, but here he was forced to get up and approach the nose standing behind the desk. He could only manage a good 5 feet every second or two, while the nose is clearly someone much younger, so they take a few Bugs Bunny turns around the table, the nose somehow throwing yet another balloon at the now chaos in front of him as he passes. Finally, the nose runs out the room, whether to reload or to escape I could not tell. And here is where the professor made his fatal mistake and turned this story into high school legend. He left the room and chased after the nose. The chaos stopped for the briefest of moments, a common thought crossing the class mind. Had that man just left the room? Had the one authority ostensibly meant to keep a leash on the room's hilarity left us to our own devices? A moment passes. Then two footsteps echo fainter and fainter up the hallway and no one is coming back. Yes he had. The madman had actually left us alone. The calm breaks. An utter shitstorm ensues. Can't